Let's rewind back to 2002 and 2003. With graphics that I designed in Microsoft Paint and my brother distributing a game online for me, I released my very first game. This game was called Randolph the Reindeer Christmas Edition. Looking at the game now, it looks very rudimentary, but it was my first foray into game development. This was a 2D platformer inspired by my favourite time of year, Christmas. The idea is that you had to go and save Santa Claus, collecting all these elves along the way. This game would go on to win a handful of awards in online game development competitions. And this first experience in both designing and coding games gave me a new appreciation for games as an art form. At this stage, when I was effectively a preteen, these types of independent games seemed to be designated only on small corners of the internet. And the gaming landscape was dominated by only large-scale mainstream games. These mainstream games were designed for a single purpose, and that was to sell as many copies as possible. And this meant only one thing: gameplay is king. Games had to be designed in a way that will keep people coming back for more. Around this time, we were all playing games on consoles, such as Xbox and PlayStation 2.
The only place in the country that has an Xbox you can win.
Dude, PlayStation 2 with 5 gotta have games.
In addition to PC games. And this was when we started to see common themes in games. These games such as Halo, Spyro, and other franchises such as this, all would give us detailed and vast worlds to explore. And they were profound in moving an industry forward. We were all looking out for the next big game. We would all line up in game stores, all waiting for the next big release. I remember playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series hours on end. These games would ride, no pun intended, on the skating craze. And these games really would push the boundaries in a few ways. First of all, it felt like it was a race to be bigger and better. We were seeing larger worlds to explore. And also, these games were trying to push the boundaries of gameplay. For a while there, it seemed like the games that were successful are the ones that could add the most functionality into a character. For our generation, this was profound. And games like this would inspire a whole new generation of game developers. But behind the scenes, around this time, there was a small corner of the internet that were full of people, just like you and me, who took inspiration from these games and set out to make their own games. Some of them were pretty bad, others were quite good. But it didn't matter, because people were experimenting, trying new things, developing their skills. But around this time, for most people, it was just a passionate hobby. For a lucky few, these people were able to be picked up by the big developers and start amazing careers for themselves. But for others, they just remained online. And for me, this was really interesting because every single person would create their own games their own way. And it meant I saw a plethora of different styles of games, and they were all developed within the limitations of what was available to them. So this meant we weren't seeing these vast 3D worlds where you could explore, find secret passages, slay the dragons, skate around vast cities. It wasn't that. It was simple. The games were simple. The gameplay was simple, but it was inspiring. It was inspiring for one reason. In this corner of the internet, people were making art. These people were artists in all the meanings of the name. Some of them were illustrators, and you would see beautiful character designs. Some people were focused on codes, so you would see basic 8-bit characters, but the game mechanics were really polished and well made. And you'd see groups of people come together and make games in a team. As the 2000s developed and we started getting to the 2010s, all of a sudden we started to hear stories of different game developers making it big. People just like me who grew up developing games online. And how did they do this? It wasn't giving a game out for free on forums. It turns out the big players had come to play. We started seeing marketplaces appear from PlayStation, Xbox, Steam, the App Store, These platforms that came out around this time meant there was finally a possibility for people who made games to profit from their games. No longer did they have to give their games out for free. They were able to create a game and be reimbursed for their time and effort. The culture that had developed in the small corner of the internet was able to expand. More people were able to join. More people could be inspired to make their own games. As shown in Indie Game the Movie, these developers made games such as Fez, Super Meat Boy, Braid, and others.
If you can't get the work done, then the past 2 years are basically worth nothing. No pressure.
And these games brought something different to the marketplace. All of a sudden, people that had grown up on these forums online, developing art, were finally able to be seen as artists. We saw groups of people come together, design graphics that you could take a screenshot, print up, put it on the wall, and it would stand out as a work of art just like any other. Many of them had simple gameplay. Others, such as Fez, were able to use simple gameplay in conjunction with clever little tricks, like the rotation of the blocks, to create new perspectives, and the gameplay was able to be reflected in that. It wasn't about the biggest and best game, it was more about who could create a stunning work of art that people would enjoy. The art style, graphics, and music came front and center and played a big part in the game's development. One of my favourite games from around this time was Limbo. This was a small platformer game full of mind games and puzzles, but would inspire me in many different ways for years to come. With these type of games, I was able to sit down, blast the audio, and get transported into different places, where for me it felt like the mainstream developers were creating games that all felt a bit samey and that were almost clones of one another. The art styles were all very similar. They were all going for realism and grit, and some of the games started to feel a bit brown and uninspired. But then moving into the indie world, we started to see creative colours, vibrancy, beautiful illustrations, elements that created a world like never seen before. They were all echoes of what I'd seen growing up on these forums. Finally, we're able to have the time of day with the mainstream gamers. We had games like Bastion that would use clever storytelling techniques and voiceovers that made it feel like you were playing somewhat of a story or fairy tale.
He sees what's left of the rippling walls, years of work undone in an instant, in the calamity.
We had games like Journey that would use simple character designs and landscapes, but combined with the sound and audio and the beautiful animations, really took you to another place. And then we had the apps. Games like Monument Valley that would continue a beautiful art style, but would use perspective in a creative way, so that we almost had a creative gameplay.
And I think that for some players, enjoyment comes more from the story and the art and the sound and less from the gameplay.
And one of my favourite game series, Alto's Adventure, we saw a stunning, beautiful design that stood out as a masterpiece, but vibrant graphics that didn't try and add a lot of detail into the graphics. Instead would use light and light sources as the main driver for these graphics. We have newer games like Gris that has amazing soundtrack and audio, along with clever, hand-drawn design that feel like they're pulling you into the screen. And many of these games would go back to the basics of design, like colour, depth, light, and would work together in small teams to combine all these elements to make a cohesive and polished game. For me, the biggest takeaway is that these games weren't trying to make the biggest and best game possible. They were trying to make a work of art. They weren't the longest games. Some of them would only take an hour or two. But at the hour or two spent playing those games were memorable and transformative and would transport you into another world, a world of art, a world of inspiration. And for me, it meant one thing. It meant the culture that I had been a part of online all these years ago, I was able to finally pay them back. Even if it was $5 or $10, I was able to show my appreciation for the inspiration, support, and compassion that the indie game developers showed me when I was a child. At the end of the day, it's my way of saying thank you. Thank you for making the industry and this world a better place for us all.